da kažem, i to mi se čini, ja čitam svaki dan sa najvećim uživanjem, dakle, jedan izuzetno interesantan život koji je Darko Suvin imao, znači odnosi se na onaj period, do sad smo stigli negde do otprilike kraja 40-ih, ili tako, 50-ih godina, dok je stigao fejton.
Pa neće puno dalje, još 2-3 godine.
Jel tako, dobro.
Pa ima i danas granica, znam.
U svakom slučaju želeo sam da kažem da je knjiga Darka Suvina, Naučna fantastika, spoznaja sloboda, objavljena na našem jeziku. Objavio je izdavač Slovoslavija, Beograd, priredio je Dejan Ajdačić, koji nažalost trenutno ne živi u Srbiji, pa onda prosto nema onoga ko bi se brinuo o istinskom plasmanu jedne knjige u javnosti, da se ona stvarno pročita i da o njoj počne i da se mnogo više govori, pa i piše. Ono što je naš problem ovde, mi nemamo dozvolu na univerzitetu da prodajemo knjige, ali knjige pretpostavljam da mogu biti kupljene sutra na skriptarnici Fakulteta dramskih umetnosti i u Centru za kulturnu dekontaminaciju kada budu tamo državne.
Mislim da su već tamo.
Da, su već, tako da se mogu tamo kupiti. A mi, eto, prosto smo želeli da vam to pokažemo. Pravila su jako stroga, mi se za taj deo posla kao univerzitet nismo registrovali, dakle, ne bavimo se profitabilnim aktivnostima, pa čak ni ovim koja su u stvari potpuno neprofitna, već za obostranu korist. Dakle, vi ste dobili i handouts, još sam samo želela da kažem da je profesor Darko Suvin ovde gost učitelja neznalice, gost Fakulteta dramskih umetnosti, ovde je sa nama profesor dr. Nikola Maričić, koji je inače uvaženi i član društva naučne fantastike Lazar Komarčić, ali je naravno profesor radio produkcije pre svega. On je i gost Univerziteta umetnosti, odseka za teoriju umetnosti i medija. Sa nama je profesorka dr. Nevena Daković, koja je takođe naravno i profesor na Fakultetu dramskih umetnosti. Ja vam se svima zahvaljujem što ste došli i sada dajem reč profesoru Suvinu.
Smijem ja da ostavim sednik, jel?
Kako da ne, kako da ne.
Pa ja moram početi sa zahvalama. Moja prva zahvala ide odsutnom Dejanu Ajdačiću, koji je živi u Kijevu kao ukrajinski zet i nije tu, ali bez njega te knjige bilo ne bi. Pa se nadam da ćemo neko prenijeti. Mi smo vrlo lijepo sarađivali na prevođenju, na izboru. Eto, recite mi da smo ga spominjali po dobru. A dalje treba da se zahvalim evo profesorici Mileni Dragičević-Češić i svim drugim kolegama, kolegi Maričiću, kolegici Daković, novoj rektorici, na vrlo lijepom gostoprimstvu, a vama imam da se donekle možda izvinim, ali vjerovatno ne previše, jer su mi rekli da vi svi fino znate engleski, da finom nekad samo ja govorim na engleskom, što ću ja i učiniti. Naprosto zato što cijeli život pričam o science fiction na engleskom. Okay. My title is An Approach to Science Fiction. What, why, how, for whom? And I have 3 parts. I hope you got the handout. I have 4 parts, sorry. If I get to be longer than I think I ought to, which is about 45 minutes, then I shall maybe cut something, and if anybody is interested in getting my notes, my full notes, not this, but the 7 or whatever pages, you can get it. My email is dsuvin@gmail.com. So you just ask me and you can get it and say I have been at the lecture and etc. I would like to approach what may be science fiction by reading you and then commenting a few sentences which you have written down here. The first one is, the door opened a blue eye and looked at him, and it is from a text, an old text from the 40s by Cyril Kornbluth. The door means here a metonymy for the doorknob, of course, klinka. What is this word beast? This one sentence. It is the first sentence of a story. So you don't know anything. You've picked up a book, you don't know what it is. On the cover it doesn't say anything except the title. You open it and you read this sentence. This could be, for example, out of a sentence out of Alice in Wonderland. Okay, nobody would be surprised. It could be a sentence out of a surrealist prose poem, let us say, or something similar, Dadaist, surrealist, whatever you wish. That is to say, it could belong to different genres. And before you disambiguate what you may think is the genre this belongs to, you cannot give its full import to this sentence. How do you disambiguate it? By reading on and going to the second, third, fourth sentence, and then eventually, by the end of a certain passage, perhaps a paragraph, perhaps a page or two, you decide that this is, let us say, science fiction. So the first question when reading a text in general, I'm getting into theory here, is what contract with the reader does it belong to? I have argued at length that the contracts are basically, and you can see this, I shall not discuss page 2 of your handout with you, but you can see my argument here, that the basic contracts are let us call it, I don't know what to call it, a text belonging to naturalistic narrative genres or estranged narrative genres. I don't like the word naturalistic, but I don't have a better one. If this sentence does not belong to the naturalistic contract with the reader, does it belong to a genre that obeys the laws of physics and cognition in general, which are present in our mental encyclopedia? I take the concept from Umberto Eco, if you know what I mean. Or is it a genre that in some key ways does not obey these laws as they are not in nature but in our mental encyclopedia? We believe that doors do not open eyes. Okay? If the next sentence or proposition were to be something like, beautiful green ideas fought furiously inside that eye. Okay, this is a sentence from Linguistic Debates for those of you who have studied linguistics. Then a high probability would be coming about that it was a nonsense text or a surrealist text. A nonsense text is of course not nonsense, okay? It's simply a text built on different laws of sense. And that text draws its meaning from a metaphorical application and not from a literal possibility in a given new world. Second sentence, we landed in the light of the blue sun, invented by me. But you can find very similar sentences in a zillion science fiction stories. What does that mean? How can you read it? How must you read it in order to understand it? You must read it as we landed in the light of a blue and not yellow sun. Because your default option in computer lingo is our sun is yellow. Suns are yellow. Well, not all of them are, and if we landed in the sentence of a blue sun, then this is not our empirical world. Either our sun's color has been rendered blue by, let us say, a space mirror of some kind, which is not in our present empirical world, or you are on another planet. That's to say, you have at that moment in your head two worlds. You have our default normal encyclopedia, world encyclopedia, and you have the new encyclopedia which is being built out of our normal one plus the addition of what you are reading. And you have a feedback between one and the other. Okay, the feedback is blue and not yellow sun. Okay. This is for the moment a neutral or multivalent elsewhere. We don't know anything about it except that it's an elsewhere. It's not here. It's either an elsewhere in our future, in time, or in space. What does it imply? It implies flying, we landed. It implies seeing, you see the light of the sun. It implies existence of solar systems. In brief, in Aristotelian terms, it implies the existence of genera, literary genus, genera, known to you. Okay? Flying, seeing, solar systems. But then it implies the existence of species inside this genera, or at least one species, which is not familiar to you. That is to say, a solar system with a blue sun. And you land presumably not on the sun, but on the planet. The genus is here a new and different space-time. If you wish to be very Greek or Latin, you will call it a chronotope, as in Mikhail Bakhtin. Of course, this is a possible philosophical minefield. I'm asking you to base your approach on an imaginary encyclopedia. What is an imaginary encyclopedia is different from every person, but there is a given sociolect in a society which is the statistical common denominator. It is in Eco's definition, it is the dominant discursive and practical perceptions of our reality or common world. This shapes then in language your encyclopedia. Third sentence, the door I raised. You know what that means? It opens from the inside out, like the iris, right? When this sentence was written, here history comes in. And you see that science fiction is a historical genre in history. When this sentence was written in the 1940s, it is by Robert Heinlein. This didn't exist in the Reader's Encyclopedia. Therefore, this sentence very economically immediately tells you, we are not here and now. So our implicational category apparatus in the mind starts worrying. It doesn't exist in our reality, so it's an elsewhere and all elsewhere. It is a new chronotope. The categories here are building, door, perception by a sense. You somehow sense it arising. It doesn't say by seeing, by the way. Intelligent beings implied as builders. Nature doesn't make doors arising or not. Implied as users and implied as observers. Who is observing this? We don't know it in the first sentence. We shall know it in the second sentence. All these categories are imported from the reader's reality, not from science fiction. Door, intelligent beings, Since a story must have beside a chronotope also narrative agents, this means that these agents, or characters, or whatever you wish to call them, will be either also new, or they will be normalizing representatives of the implied reader. In other words, our representatives in the story world, as Gulliver is in the various countries he visits. He's our normal representative. Here the second sentence could be, for example, to his, her, or its ultraviolet sight, it looked weather-beaten. So then you know that the narrator of the story is not a human being, because human beings don't have ultraviolet sights unless specially technically equipped. And you have so in fact you have two alternatives. a specially technically equipped human being, or a narrative agent who is from an alien species. Or it could be, in fact, Kornbluth's second sentence, because he was writing for adolescents in pulp journals and wanted to reassure them immediately so there couldn't be no ultraviolet aliens. Cameron stopped moving. So our representative has a nice American name, Scottish American. Cameron stopped moving. So in other words, he has entered this strange building. He's obviously an astronaut, an explorer, our hero. And now what happens? Read the third sentence. The fourth sentence is out of the founding text, I think. It is said that all Russian literature got out of Gogol's mantle. Well, all science fiction got out of H.G. Wells' Time Machine, in my opinion. And this is a sentence from the Time Machine. The time traveler, it's not the beginning, but it's the beginning of a section when he arrives into the future for the first time. The time traveler emerged, I'm not going to read it, you have it here, okay? Early in the history of science fiction, the reader has to be led by realistic validation. Here, for example, which is Victorian history, this was published around 1900, is still ongoing. We get to the year 802,701, and it will reserve some huge surprises. The surprises are that social classes, the upper and the lower, become special alien species. And furthermore, that the lower species becomes the higher one. So this is the worst possible nightmare scenario for a normal reader of H.G. Wells, who is a literate upper-class Englishman of 1900. Okay? Illiteracy was then around more than 50%, I think, something like that. So what do you have here? You have a machine, the time traveler, you know that from before, the time machine. You have a time which is linked to our time historically, however far it may be. So this is a time in which causes from the reader's empirical world have results in the future. This is called technically ergodic time. You have a validation from naturalism. In the dim light, there is a counter which is like a pedometer, or Wells was a bicycle aficionado. This was new at the time to have a bicycle. And then you have historical time, which is turning into geological time. That is to say, it's Darwin's time, okay? Except that it's anti-Darwin, because it's not the development of species, but the downfall of the species, of the human species. At any rate, all the others you will find out are extinct anyway. Now, the problem is that time travel is logically impossible. Not physically possible. It's much stronger. It's logically impossible, as is logically impossible that a bigger circle will have a radius smaller than a smaller circle. This is logically impossible. What is physically impossible can be changed, perhaps, by science and technology. What is logically impossible cannot be changed. Yet, some very good science fiction, in this case Wells's, among the best, is based on the false analogy used by Wells here. What is the false analogy? That time is the fourth dimension of space. He wrote an essay about that, so we know it. Why does this work? It works for two reasons. A, because it's a language mirage. For traditionally, in all Indo-European languages at least, all temporal metaphors are derived from spatial ones. Okay? It is further away in time. It comes from space, of course. We have no special name for something further in time. space is immediately perceptible by our senses and time is not. So if you can move inside 3 dimensions, well said, you could move inside the 4th dimensions of time, which is a logical non sequitur and a false analogy. Language suggests it, but as different from space, time is not reversible or repetitive, etc., etc., etc. The second reason why this works, besides being a language mirage, it works because it vehiculates or carries a strong metaphoric tenor about a horrible socio-political devolution different from the actual story as vehicle. This is a narration called a parable, a story which has a vehicle and a tenor, okay, like, for example, Rabbi Jehoshua, or if you prefer, Jesus' parables in the New Testament. Okay? This is a long discussion. I will abbreviate it by saying that my stance is that all science fiction texts are more or less clear parables, whose clarity is strongly responsible for the story's coherence and significance. So that you can say that the vehicle here becomes secondary and we can use the false analogy of the time travel as long as it doesn't become the tenor or the meaning. Then we cannot use it. Therefore, in the time machine, what you find out, the tenor of the parable is more important than how you justify the finding in pseudoscientific terms, although this is also important. Nonetheless, this justification creates a frame of mind, setting up clear boundaries and signposts for interpretation. If they are dispensed with, if, for example, we have the sentence about green ideas, what is it? Beautiful green ideas fought furiously inside that eye after the first sentence, then you would be in fantasy or surrealism or whatever, but not in science fiction. My second part is why and how to approach science fiction. Since we are in an age of self-referentiality, the listener is probably due some credo of my own. Perhaps this purpose will be best served by 2 sets of presuppositions that I articulated in an earlier book of mine as answers to the questions why discuss para-literature or popular literature, and secondly, why talk about science fiction. Indeed, why? Isn't the study of great world fiction from the Xi Jinping, say, to today's Latin Americans immense for however busy a lifetime? Yes, it is. And I suspect fans who never read anything but science fiction cannot fully appreciate even science fiction, I'm sorry to say. Yet the classicist idea of a great tradition of masterpieces calls to my mind immediately the historical semantics of classics. What is classic in the sense of T.S. Eliot or George Lukács? Class was first defined, as you surely know, by King Servius Tullius's division of the Roman population into social classes based on military and economic status. From those which were not rich enough to acquire the simple proletarians and were therefore excluded to acquire the simplest armament called the proletarians, and who were excluded from serving in the army except as drawers of water and carriers of wood, but they didn't have swords. Okay, that's what proletarians are. Those who have proles, offspring, working hands. Thus, classic means that which pertains to the highest class of value, as defined by and correlative to the highest class of master people. So, I do not wish to dispute the existence of value classes, on the contrary, but I find the historical practice of masterpieces limited by this kind of class-based individualism and elitism. For one radical example, should cultural investigation accept as its defining category and value the market fact of usually publishing narratives in single-author book volumes? In other words, our understanding of literature is based on the market fact of brand naming by author. I doubt this. I doubt that this determines the value. Of course, I have not escaped committing essays on P.K. Dick or Ursula Le Guin. It's very difficult to do so, and it's up to a point useful. Yet the basic way of slicing up literature is, in my opinion, some complex grouping of books and stories and all the other sounds around and about them, from collective discourses into macro texts. For example, hard science fiction or cyberpunk or feminist utopia or whatever you wish. This is what the reader looks for when buying a magazine or book. Of course, the reader may also look for Gwyneth Jones or Ian Banks or Robert Heinlein, but then these authors also serve as specific horizons and voices as idiosyncratic as cyberpunk. Not all authors can serve this purpose. Obviously, the historical choice among book titles is challenged by democracy. All the individual texts are, so to speak, in the American blues song, God's Chillin' and Got Wings. They have an at least potential dignity of their own, and they ought to be considered because they are there. So this is my argument about paraliterature, or popular literature. And by the way, the Book of Old Poems, or what we today think of as classics, were peasant songs. Shakespeare performed for groundlings also, and Brecht played in cabaret. So history is not with you if you want to be classical. Second question, why science fiction? Well, it means for me primarily, how do I think one should approach science fiction? I have started this as a socialist, fascinated by what the Gershwin brothers called "it ain't necessarily so" aspect of science fiction. Of course, this embraces also with all the narrations which deal with analogues to, let us say, an impulse towards knowledge wedded to self-governing happiness on this earth. Bearing in mind that every science fiction narration is a dialogue with the reader here and now, this also embraces all the stories that deal with radically worse relationships, not only with radically better ones than those the reader knows. Since the reader's reaction to such stories recuperates these new maps of hell for the positive vision. In other words, if we can avoid the dystopia, then we have learned this and this and this positively. Let me see. I think I shall skip the section about the novum, and whoever wants to have it, you write me and you shall get it. So finally, I want to give you some sociology of science fiction. How did science fiction become a literary genre? It had significant constituents which began to move towards mass ideological and commercial status in 19th century Europe. Juvenile science fiction in French family magazines, first constituent Jules Verne. The Future War in British and then European pamphlets and booklets, whose culmination is, of course, Wells's The War of the Worlds. But there were dozens of these books which pertain to political science and mass propaganda, German against England, French against Germany, and so on and so on. Political anticipations of the extreme left and right wings battling the bourgeois present. Scientifico-utopian speculations in a very popular cluster, all of which culminates in H.G. Wells. They all meet, they come from different places, and culminate in Wells, with a secondary model in Verne which Wells disliked. European science fiction continued to produce until the 1940s original and sometimes popular writers building on Verne and Wells. I shall mention only one name, Karel Čapek. Yet a permanently viable commercial genre, which baptized itself as science fiction, was developed in 20th century USA, first in pulp magazines for teenagers, and then in mass market paperbacks as of the 1940s, which, by the way, developed for the American Army, little pocket books, just like internet. The US tradition had popular native